The silence in the executive suite is heavier than the 64 stories of steel and glass pressing down from above. I am sitting in the chair that once belonged to a god, watching the steam rise from a cup of coffee that cost more than my first month's rent in Queens. Across from me, Marcus Thorne, a man who once viewed me as nothing more than a biological shoeshine kit, is hyperventilating. His $3,000 suit is damped with the cold sweat of a billion-dollar realization. He doesn't recognize me yet. To him, I am just the youngest CEO in the history of Sterling Vane. But in 10 seconds, I am going to show him the silk square I've kept in my pocket for 5 years. I'm going to show him the exact moment his empire began to bleed. This wasn't just a transition of power, it was a long overdue surgical extraction. I remember the exact texture of the carpet 5 years ago, a beige, low-pile industrial blend that seemed designed to absorb the dignity of junior analysts. I spent 300 nights on that carpet, fueled by vending machine caffeine and the bitter knowledge that my ideas were being harvested like wheat by men who couldn't explain the algorithms I'd built. Marcus was the chief harvester. He had a way of leaning over your shoulder, smelling of expensive sandalwood and unearned confidence, and saying, "Good work, kid," right before he'd present your 3-month project to the board as his own afternoon epiphany. I watched him climb. I watched him buy the house in the Hamptons with the bonus he earned for my Project Glass initiative. I watched him fire my mentor, Elias, for a clerical error that Marcus himself had engineered. It was Elias who told me on his way out with a cardboard box of 30 years of memories, "Don't just quit, Arthur. If you leave now, you're just another ghost in the machine. If you stay, you can become the ghost that haunts it." That was the night the fire changed. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about the architecture of consequence. Every move I made for the next 48 months was a calculated piece of a larger mosaic. I didn't just work hard. I became an essential, invisible utility. I learned that the most powerful person in a room isn't the one speaking, but the one who controls the data everyone else is reacting to. I built backdoors into the proprietary trading software, not to steal, but to observe. I saw the shadow ledgers, the offshore shell companies Marcus used to hide his management fees, and the subtle ways he was embezzling from the pension funds to cover his gambling debts in Macau. I had enough to sink him in year 2, but sinking a man like Marcus isn't enough. You have to wait until he thinks he's reached the summit of his life, so the fall takes longer. Now, as the digital clock on the wall clicks to 8:02 a.m., I reach into my pocket. The silk square is cool against my fingers. It's the same one he threw at me 5 years ago when I spilled a drop of tea on his desk. "Clean it up," he'd said, without looking up. I never cleaned it. I kept it. I studied it. And today, I'm giving it back, along with the subpoena that will finalize his transition from the penthouse to a prison cell. The look on his face isn't just fear. It's the dawning realization that the person he ignored for half a decade was the only person truly paying attention.
5 years ago, the halls of Sterling Vane felt like a labyrinth designed to swallow the small. I was 22, a first-generation college graduate with a suit from a thrift store that smelled faintly of cedar and desperation. I had arrived with a heart full of ambitious fire, believing that merit was the only currency that mattered in the high-stakes world of Manhattan finance. Marcus Thorne, the senior VP of operations, was the minotaur at the center of that maze. He was a man who moved with the predatory grace of a shark, his presence announced by the sharp click of his heels and the scent of expensive sandalwood. Marcus didn't just lead, he decimated. The incident happened on a Tuesday. I had been pulled into a late-night session to finalize the Q3 projections. Marcus was pacing the room, his eyes darting across the monitors with the hunger of a man who never had enough. I was tired, my hands shaking from the 10th cup of coffee, when I reached for a file and knocked over his porcelain cup. A single dark drop of Earl Grey hit the corner of a signed contract. The room went silent. Marcus didn't scream. He didn't even look at me. He just reached into his breast pocket, pulled out a pristine silk pocket square, and dropped it onto the desk. "Clean it up, Arthur," he whispered. "And when you're done, find a way to make yourself useful, or find the door." That moment crystallized something inside me. It wasn't just the humiliation, it was the casualness of it. To him, I was a tool, an appliance that had momentarily malfunctioned. I spent the rest of that night cleaning the desk, but I kept the square. I realized then that the only way to beat a man who thinks he's untouchable is to become the hand that touches everything he values. I began to map the company, not by its organizational chart, but by its secrets. I stayed late, not to work on his projects, but to audit his history. I found the discrepancies in the London accounts. I found the emails to the Cayman entities. I found the pattern of his greed. I realized that Marcus Thorne's greatest weakness was his own ego. He assumed that because I was quiet, I was empty. He assumed that because I was helpful, I was subservient. He began to trust me with the dirty work, the tasks he didn't want his peers to see. He had me reconcile his private accounts, thinking I was too intimidated to understand what the numbers actually meant. But I understood. I understood that he was leveraged to the hilt, playing a dangerous game of musical chairs with the company's capital. I didn't report him. Not yet. Instead, I helped him. I made his schemes more efficient. I made him feel safe. For 3 years, I was the perfect shadow. I watched him buy the yacht, the penthouse, the art collection. Every purchase was a brick in the wall of his own vanity, and every brick had my signature on it, hidden in the fine print of the transactions I facilitated. I was building a cage out of his own desires. I became his confidant, the one he leaned on when the regulators got too close. I whispered the solutions that would keep him afloat, each one a subtle thread in a web that was slowly tightening around his throat. I wasn't just an employee anymore. I was the architect of his survival, and therefore, the only one who knew exactly how to destroy him.
The next year was a masterclass in psychological camouflage. I became the person Marcus Thorne couldn't live without, all while ensuring he never actually saw me as a person. I learned the rhythm of his life better than he knew it himself. I learned his coffee order, precisely 190 degrees, his mistress's favorite florist, the specific brand of scotch he kept in the bottom drawer for emergencies, and the exact moments his blood pressure would spike. I became the invisible hand that smoothed the ripples in his chaotic life, making him believe he was a genius of organization, when in reality, I was the one holding the pillars of his empire together. Camouflage isn't about hiding. It's about blending into the expectations of others. Marcus expected a loyal, slightly dim-witted assistant who was grateful for the crumbs of his success. So that's exactly what I gave him. I perfected the art of the blank stare when he discussed his illegal offshore maneuvers. I practiced the nod of admiration when he bragged about crushing a competitor through insider trading. Inside, I was a recording device, a digital vault of every sin he committed in the name of profit. I documented every meeting, every wire transfer, and every hushed phone call. I began to leak information, not to the press or the SEC, but to his rivals within the firm. I did it subtly, a misplaced memo here, an accidental BCC on an email there. I watched as the vultures began to circle, sensing blood in the water. Marcus became paranoid, as I knew he would. He started to pull his assets closer, consolidating his power into the very accounts I controlled. He thought he was protecting himself, but he was actually gathering all his vulnerabilities into one place. He came to me, sweating and pale, asking for my help to clean things up one last time before the annual audit. This was the pivot point. I didn't just clean the books, I rewrote them. I created a trail that led directly to him, but only if you knew where to look. I planted the seeds of his downfall in the very documents he signed to save himself. I watched him sign his own career's death warrant with a gold-plated pen, a gift from the board for his exemplary service. He thanked me. He actually thanked me and told me there might be a VP spot for me in the spring. I smiled and told him I was just happy to be of service. The irony was a delicious private vintage I savored every night. As the audit approached, I started to position myself for the vacuum that would follow his departure. I made alliances with the board members he had insulted. I provided solutions to the problems he had created. I was no longer just the assistant. I was the rising star who seemed to have an uncanny ability to fix Marcus Thorne's mistakes. By the time the regulators finally knocked on the door, Marcus was standing on a trapdoor I had spent 5 years building, and I was the only one with the lever. The art of invisibility was over. It was time to be seen.
The day of the internal audit began with a false sense of security. Marcus Thorne arrived at 7:30 a.m., smelling of confidence and a $300 haircut. He patted me on the shoulder as he walked past my desk, a gesture of ownership he'd perfected over half a decade. "Big day, Arthur," he said, his voice a low purr. "We're putting on a show for the board." I smiled, the kind of professional mask I had spent years forging in the fires of my own resentment. "The show is already scripted, Marcus," I replied. He didn't hear the double meaning. He never did. He was too busy rehearsing the lies he was about to tell. The lies about the London shortfall, the lies about the pension fund reallocation, and the lies about his own genius. As the board members filed into the conference room, I felt the weight of the digital files on my encrypted drive. For 5 years, I had been the silent curator of his sins. I had watched him treat people like disposable assets, discarding mentors and protégés alike whenever they stopped being useful to his ascent. I remembered Elias, my first boss, who had been fired for a mistake Marcus had framed for him. I remembered the look in Elias's eyes as he walked out with a single cardboard box. A 30-year career reduced to a stapler and a few family photos. The meeting started with Marcus at the head of the table. He was magnificent in his deception. He used charts I had designed to hide the very losses they were supposed to report. He spoke of synergy and calculated risks, while the board nodded like well-trained seals. But then it was time for the Q&A. This was the moment I had prepared for. A board member asked about a specific wire transfer to a subsidiary in the British Virgin Islands. Marcus turned to me, his smile never wavering. "Arthur, pull up the reconciliation for the BVI account, will you?" I didn't pull up the reconciliation he had asked for. Instead, I pulled up the private ledger I had been keeping, the one that showed the money hadn't gone to a subsidiary at all, but to a shell company owned by Marcus's personal lawyer. The room went cold. The silence wasn't just quiet, it was absolute. Marcus looked at the screen, then at me. For the first time in 5 years, he actually saw me. He saw the kid who spilled the tea. He saw the assistant who never complained. And finally, he saw the man who was about to destroy him. The board members were ushered out of the room by security, leaving only Marcus and me in the glass-walled cathedral of Sterling Vane. The city of Manhattan stretched out behind him, a shimmering grid of lights that he no longer owned. He didn't move for a long time. He just stared at the screen where the evidence of his 5-year spree of embezzlement was laid bare in high definition. "Why?" he whispered. It wasn't a question of morality, it was a question of tactical failure. He couldn't understand how he had let a nobody like me get so close to the jugular. I walked over to the desk and pulled the silk pocket square from my pocket, the one he had thrown at me 5 years ago. I laid it flat on the mahogany surface. "You told me to make myself useful, Marcus. So I did. I made myself the most useful thing in your life. I became the person who knew where all the bodies were buried because I was the one who helped you dig the graves." He lunged for the laptop, a desperate, clumsy move that lacked all the grace he usually projected. I didn't even have to move. Security was already at the door. "It's over, Marcus. The SEC is downstairs. They've been looking at these files for 3 weeks. I didn't just find the evidence, I gave them the map." He slumped back into his leather chair, the chair that cost more than a mid-sized sedan. He looked small. For the first time, the suit didn't fit him. "He made you," he hissed, his voice cracking. "You were nothing before you walked into this office." "I was a person before I walked into this office," I said, leaning over the table so our eyes were level. "You're the one who forgot what that looked like. You thought the world was divided into predators and prey, and you were so sure you were the shark. But the ocean is full of things that stay quiet until they're ready to bite." I watched as the police entered. There was no dramatic struggle. Marcus went quietly, his head bowed, the sandalwood scent finally replaced by the sterile smell of fear. As they led him away, he looked back one last time. I didn't feel the triumph I expected. I just felt a profound sense of closure. The debt was paid. The collapse of Sterling Vane was the lead story on every financial news network for a month. To the world, it was a tragedy of corporate greed and a failure of oversight. To the employees, it was a terrifying period of uncertainty. but to those of us who knew the truth, it was a long overdue cleansing. I was offered a position by the interim board to help navigate the restructuring. They saw me as a hero, the whistleblower who saved the company from total ruin. I turned them down. I didn't want to stay in a building where every floor was haunted by the ghost of the person I had to become to win. I had spent 5 years in a state of controlled anger, and I was ready to breathe air that didn't taste like ozone and ambition. I visited Elias a week later. He was living in a small house in Vermont, surrounded by books and the quiet life he had been forced into. I gave him a check, a significant portion of the whistleblower reward I had received. He tried to refuse, but I told him it wasn't a gift. It was back pay for the dignity he had lost. "You did it, Elias," he said, looking at the news report on his old television. "But was it worth the 5 years?" I looked at my hands. They were steady. "I didn't lose 5 years, Elias. I earned them. I learned how the world works, and I learned that the most powerful thing you can be is the person no one sees coming." Today, I own a small consulting firm. We don't deal in hostile takeovers or offshore accounts. We deal in ethics. We audit the cultures of companies to make sure the next Marcus Thorne never gets the chance to throw a silk square at a 22-year-old kid. Sometimes, when I'm in the city, I look up at the 64th floor of the Sterling Vane building. The lights are still on, and the machine is still humming. But I know that somewhere in that building, there's a junior analyst sitting at a desk, watching and waiting. And I hope, for their sake, they're paying attention, because the architecture of consequence is always building, and the bill always, eventually, comes due.